Hello again, and welcome to another chess vlog. I guess this is a regular thing now. But then again, I do get some interesting games from time to time, and it would be a shame not to show them off. So in this video, I've got an interesting game, an epic game, even though I make a lot of mistakes during it, and a kind of funny game, so I think that'll be interesting to see. So, starting with the interesting game first, I am black in this game. We have e4, e5, knight attacks pawn, knight defends pawn, bishop advances, my bishop advances. He moves his pawn forward to stop my knight from advancing any further. And then I move my pawn to open the way for the bishop. And then he attacks my bishop with his pawn. So I capture, he recaptures, and then I give check to get the bishop out of the way of the pawn for free. And then he blocks my bishop with his knight, which I think is a little bit strange. What I would have done is block the bishop with my own bishop. Because instead of blocking with a knight, this gives the option of later capturing my bishop, and then I would recapture with my knight, but then you would no longer have a pinned piece. And then what I could do is, if he does not decide to capture me, I could capture him, and then there's a bunch of pieces ready to recapture. So I think blocking with the bishop would have been a better play. But the knight is fine. I just don't like that you're intentionally pinning a piece to your king. So I decide to pin his other knight to the queen. And then this pawn move is a little bit strange, and the bot agrees with me. See, what's wrong with this is, after this exchange, where I capture the knights in exchange for my bishops, if the queen captures here, then what I'm allowed to do is move the knight to attack both the bishop and the queen at the same time. If the pawn had not moved, then I would not be able to do that. And then he moves his queen to this space. He's preparing to attack the g-pawn. But that doesn't make much sense because I could just capture the bishop, and even if he decides to take this pawn, see, this is actually a common attack that I do not like falling for, but it's not really that much of a move. Even though it looks like you're getting the queen deep into the enemy territory, all I have to do is move my queen here, and then you have the option of either trading the queen for some other piece or just trading queens. And it's not really good for white in this position because even after an exchange of queens, I'm still up by one bishop. Well, in exchange for my bishops, of course. Like his bishops and knights are gone, except for this one. So, due to being afraid of that attack on the g-pawn, I actually moved the g-pawn forward to stop that from happening. Which the bot doesn't like because there was a free bishop there. Why didn't you take it? So his bishop gives check to get him out of the way of the knight for free. I block with the pawn to also attack the bishop. And then the bishop moves back. The bot is suggesting attacking my knight with his pawn. Which, kicking the knight is probably fine. There's not a lot of safe squares for it to go to. Next, I decide to kick the bishop again. And the bishop goes to a decent square, so that's fine. That actually stops the knight from moving here. So then I move my queen to this space. I'm preparing to attack this pawn, but there's not really a point to it. I didn't see that the queen was actually defending the pawn, so no real reason for me to do that at the moment, unless I figure out a way to kick the queen later. He moves his bishop one space forward to stop me from attacking this pawn. I guess he didn't see that the queen was defending that square anyways. So next, I capture here, which is, it's probably okay. He's going to capture back, right? Yeah, he does with the bishop. That kind of allowed the bishop to develop further for free, and he's also attacking the rook way back here now that I look at it. So what did I do next? Oh yeah, I got the rook out of the way. So at least the rook is a bit developed now. He then moves this pawn forward. That creates a discovered attack on my queen, so I have to get it out of the way. And I also could have blocked with the pawn. I suppose that would be a little bit better because you'd be getting a pawn further into the enemy's space. So next, this move is a little bit weird. He moves his queen to attack this rook, and if he does manage to capture it, it would be a free rook. But I think kicking my knight out of the way would have been a better option because there's plenty of ways to defend that rook. Like this, for example. I move my knight to defend the rook, and all is good for now. So he decides to attack the knight. If he manages to capture this knight, then he would be able to capture the rook with a queen, and that would be really bad because he would skewer the other rook as well. Very common tactic in these early levels of chess. So this is a moment where I have to make a decision about what to do next, and I think I spend a lot of time on this. You can't see the clock, but yes, I think I've spent nearly a minute figuring this out. So I first give check to get the king into a kind of worse position. I don't really know if that's worth it, but I can move the queen back here to defend the rook. And I didn't really need to do that. One thing that I could have done instead is just move the rook forward to get it away from the queen's line of fire and also defend the knight at the same time. And the game would have gone on from there. So what happened in the actual game was he does this, which is the bot really wants him to just take the knight, because that would force me to, I think, it would force me to take with the king, because if I take with the queen, then it's enabling the skewer that I just talked about. Let me show that off just a moment. Oh, this would actually... Does this lose me the game? Oh, I would actually block with the queen. Okay. But yeah, that's a really dangerous position to be in. So yes, what the bot wanted him to do was do that, but he decided to try and kick the knight instead. So what I did in response is I captured his bishop, gets me out of the way of the bishop, and also takes his other bishop. I mean, he can recapture, but he has to be very careful about it, because now, with that bishop gone, there is a threat on the board that will be very bad for him, and he does not notice it because he just captured my knight. What he needed to do was move the rook here, because what I'm threatening to do is play this move, and according to the robot on the site, I can actually checkmate him in 10 moves if I play it correctly, and that was the first of those moves. But mate in 10, not something somebody at my level is going to find very easily. So it actually plays out a lot differently from how it's expected. So first thing he does is move the king there. I give check again, which is already a mistake because that disables the mate in 10 maneuver that the bot was recommending. So he moves there, and I decide to castle. I just want to see what he does next so I can reply to it. And that move is to bishop to e7, attacking the rook. However, this is a very bad mistake. He needed to defend that pawn on f4, because now I can simply play queen takes f4, and it's an instant victory for me. But I didn't notice this. So what happened instead was I got the rook out of the way, missed an easy win right there, which is unfortunate, but as we all know, checkmating that quickly and that easily is very dishonorable. Nah, it actually isn't, but whatever. So by capturing that bishop, he's at least defending the instant win. So I decided to take another bishop, and after that, he decides to try attacking the rooks. So I move my queen to defend them, and again, very easy to simply play this move to get one of the rooks away for free, because he actually can't go to f2 with his king. The knight is defending that. So that would have been one way to solve this. I instead just move the queen here, defending both rooks if he decides to capture them, so he goes for a queen trade instead. And then his bishop moves all the way over there for some reason. I don't really know why. What's he doing over there? I mean, there's a lot of things that I could do in this spot. I could kick the bishop with his pawn. The knight's defending it. And I could also give check, which is what I did. But the bot is recommending that I attack the bishop with the other rook. So, whatever. And that is probably not the tile you wanted to move to. So now I'm going to put some more pressure on that king. If the rook takes the pawn at this stage, then it's going to be very bad for him, because the knight is going to be defending that square. And also, while I'm looking at it, I missed a fork. As you can see, that if I had done this, the king would be in check, and he would have no way to defend this rook. Like, if he moves out of the way, obviously I'm going to lose the knight. But this rook is way in the back where it can't really do anything interesting, and I can also simply take the bishop. So that would have been a good play too. So what happens instead is I get my other rook to attack the king. That's not where you want to go with the bishop, because there's a lot of moves that I can play and give check in. In fact, there's a mate in 3 available according to the robot. Let's see if I found it. There's one move. That move there is the only move. And then I play another check, and both of these rooks are being defended by the knight. This really felt like a really great play when I was doing it myself. And then the king goes into that position. That's also the only move available at this point. And then I simply play king to h4, and it's checkmate. So that's the interesting game, kinda. Now for the second game, which I think was very exciting. Okay, it's time for game 2, and upon looking this over, this is nowhere near as epic as I made it out to be. It's just both of us making a lot of mistakes. I think if Stockfish tried to review this, his head would explode. His robotic head. Or whatever. Let's get into it. I am white this time. We open with e4, of course, and then e5, knight attacks pawn, pawn defends pawn, bishop advances. And then this pawn moves forward, which is an adequate move. It stops my knight from advancing to g5. I move my pawn forward to open the way for the other bishop. Queen moves forward, a little bit odd, but whatever. I mean, it's a fine move, really, but I wouldn't advance the queen that far this early in the game. I'm focusing on developing my pieces in this game, as you can see, and the opponent is actually moving a lot of pawns forward. He's playing very defensively. So, after these moves, I castle here, and he moves this pawn forward, which, you know, he could have kicked my bishop if he wanted to, but no matter. And then I move my pawn forward to start getting some action going, because we've gone several moves without any capturing happening, and that's not chess. Or maybe it is. But in any case, I wanted to open the position by trading off some pieces, and he decides to advance his pawn again. This is getting a little bit strange. Well, I don't want his pawn going forward anymore, so I decide to stop it with my pawn. And then he finally decides to kick my bishop, and there's very few spaces to work with. Oh, and before we move on, another important point in this game is the time that is being used. These are 10-minute games that I am reviewing. In this game, over the course of the entire match, my opponent did not use more than 2 minutes of his time, and I used up nearly 7 minutes of my time, so I was thinking a lot more. I think that is a factor in how the game went, to be honest. So after some thinking on this move, I went back to a2 with my bishop. And then he decides to attack my knight, so at this point I've got to start trading pieces. Pawn takes, and I don't think he can take back, can he? No, he's going to try and take back with that knight move, which is a little bit odd because it leaves a vulnerability, which I did not see at first. The vulnerability is that if the queen goes to c4, you are threatening to take the pawn on c6 with check. And that doesn't really threaten any of the other pieces immediately, but it does kind of paralyze them. They're not going to want to move because the queen being in that deep is very dangerous for the enemy pieces. But that's not what I did. I decided to push my pawn to attack the knight. He captures, which it would have been better to move the knight forward, because if the knight goes to b4, then I don't think I can get my bishop to safety without losing it. Which is kind of a paradox. You know, you can't get something to safety and then lose it anyways, right? Never mind. So, knight takes the pawn instead of the queen taking the pawn. The queen taking the pawn gives check, as I mentioned. And the queen would have to go to... I think he would have to, like, block with the queen if he wants to keep his castling rights. But at this point, I don't think he's intending to castle at all. So he could have moved the king out of the way. But with the queen in this position, you can see that I can force a queen trade by capturing on f7 in the future. And again, the pieces are not in immediate danger, but they are going to be very wary about moving forward in the future. If that is what happens. That's not what happens. I decide to take with the knight, which doesn't give check. And he moves his rook to attack the knight, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you can't take the knight with a rook if I just leave it there. But I decided to not leave it there. The queen is defending the spot, but I moved it out of the way anyways, which is a little weird. Capturing this pawn would have created a more open position, and if he decides to capture back, then the d file would be open for the rook, so that would have been better. But I'm not completely lost yet. He moves his knight forward, which is acceptable. Actually a pretty good move, because it created a lot of openings in the future. So I capture with my pawn. He captures back, opening the d file, as I mentioned. And I move my rook here, but again, Like, having the queen in this spot would be so much better, and the bot is going to bug me about it for the rest of the game. Now, I make a very, very bad error here. After this pawn threatens this capture on the b pawn, that would be very bad because obviously I'm going to be in check and I can't take the pawn back because the rook is holding the file down. But what I want to do in this position, after looking at it, is I want to play this to stop the rook from advancing and capturing this pawn, and also to stop a couple of other things that could happen. But instead, I capture, which is not a good idea because the queen is right there, and it gives check. So this is very bad. The only move I have, I think... Is this the only move? Yes, this is the only move. King to d2 is forced. And this is a very bad position because there are not a lot of spaces for the king to run to. And in this spot, the bot is actually recommending a queen sacrifice here because if the queen takes, then I'm obviously taking back. But then the knight can go to e4, I'm in check again, and I don't want to go to d3 because that's going to lead to a forced checkmate. In fact, I will show it off. So king here, knight to b4, check, and then king to... I can capture here, can't I? Ah yes, if I capture here, then f5 is game over. So I instead have to go to c4, but that's no good either because bishop e6, I can only block with a rook, and then it's done. So after this, I instead want to go to... Come on, bot. If I'm not going to d3, then I have to go to c4. Then the bishop can go to e6. These are similar vulnerabilities to what we just looked at. And then after rook to d5, I'm not in immediate danger of losing, but this is getting worse and worse for white, as you can see, as black has this fork to take the rook, and then things just get worse and worse from there. So enough looking at that. Back to the actual game. What he does is castle for safety, I guess. And then I take the pawn, which is not good because I really need to start getting the king into better shape. I need to get my whole position into better shape. I can't just be snatching enemy pawns like this. This is not the time for that. The bishop really wants to go to d5 because the next move is rook to d8 with check. And this is a very important point in the game because I can only block the rook. There is... I really need to make that bishop move in order to block the rook from giving check. So I need to block the rook now. And in the game, I chose the knight to do this, but this is an instant loss because by moving the knight out of the way, now the queen is holding down all of the possible escape routes for the king, so I just need the enemy just needs a clean check in order to win the game, and knight to e4 would have done just that. What I wanted to do instead was use the bishop to block, because then this knight is now defending the e4 square. So if he decides to take with the knight as before, I can get rid of it, and he can still give check this way. And in this spot, I have to block with either the queen or the bishop, and the bishop doesn't really fix my problem, so no need to throw it away instantly. I will instead place this here, and after... I suppose after he does this, then I'm not dead yet, but I am in very bad... No, of course I am dead. Thank you, bot, for pointing that out. Okay, so I am probably dead anyways if he plays correctly, but he did not play correctly. Thankfully for me, I avoid the humiliation. He instead just takes the knight. And again, because he's using up not a lot of time to think out these moves... I think that's a factor in why he misses so many of the obvious plays. Like, no shame, but if you want to play Blitz, you should probably play Blitz. This is not super Blitz. It's fast. 10 minutes is not a lot of time. So I capture with the pawn. Again, capturing with the bishop, the better play, and so forth. Next, he gives check by capturing the pawn. Well, why didn't you play this? Because after this, the... you forked this pawn and this bishop. There's no way to save them now. But instead he captures with a rook, which allows me to take with the bishop. So, he takes... was that a knight? It was. He takes the knight with the bishop, which is Also not good. He still could have forked the bishop and been completely safe. So I decide to... This is a gambit. This looks like a mistake, and it probably is. If he had caught what I was trying to do, then I probably would have lost on the spot. So I played the gambit. He accepts the gambit. Also, this is probably not a real gambit, but I want to call it that anyways. Next, I give check, and he moves to g7 with the king, which was a mistake. He only had two options here, and the king moving at all leads to a forced checkmate. So he wanted to block with the queen. And then I suppose the game would have gone on from there. Probably would have tried to figure out some other way to deal with him. But he decides to move the king. I'm allowed to take this pawn for free because it's protected by the bishop. That's the only move available to him. And then rook to e8 is checkmate. So a lot of mistakes on both sides. But I ultimately found a mate in the end. And now for the last game of this video. This is the funny game I was talking about. There's actually a couple of different funny things about it, as you'll see. So, I'm white, and we open with e4, e5, knight attacks pawn, pawn defends pawn, knight advances, bishop pins knight to king, enemy bishop unpins, so I make the trade, and the bishop is in a slightly better position as a result. I castle, knight moves forward, I move my pawn forward 1 square instead of 2, like the bot is suggesting. If I do 2 squares, there is potential for this exchange to occur. And the knight is now attacking the bishop with potential to attack the queen later, so he has to do something about it, and this pawn is defended, so this exchange could occur. But that does not happen. I only moved 1 square forward to defend this pawn from any kind of attack. And his bishop moves forward 1 square, so my bishop attacks the enemy knight. He castles, so I trade the knight for the bishop, as I like to do, and we have a very interesting position already. The board is completely mirrored except for the fact that the enemy has 2 bishops and I have 2 knights. So that's funny thing number 1. So I move my queen forward to get it on this diagonal. He moves his rook to get it onto this file. Fine so far. I move this pawn forward. I don't really have anything else to do. Most of the squares that I could move to are controlled by the enemy, so I don't want to advance quite yet. I instead move this pawn forward. He does the same with his pawn, so he's still trying to mirror the position. My rook goes to the e file, and his rook moves forward. This is an okay move. I thought it was a little weird because you're not really doing a whole lot straight out of the gate, but I can't really attack the rook without getting captured myself. So I move my pawn 1 square forward to defend it. I'm hoping to get the knight onto this square later. The bot suggested I do it right away. So his queen moves forward, mirroring the position of my queen again. What is this, the mirror game? Okay, so my knight moves forward, bishop captures, I retake with the queen, rook goes to attack the queen, so I gotta move back. Bot suggests moving all the way back, but I want to keep my queen on this diagonal. So his queen moves forward. He's preparing to move it into the enemy territory. He could have jumped here straight away, but I guess he didn't like that too much. My pawn forward, he opts not to capture. He could be getting a little more active with his queen, but the bishop decided to go back a square. So I advance my pawn forward to attack the rook. The bot is suggesting that I go for an attack on the queen right away. And he makes the first mistake of the match, which is to move the rook here. He needed to go to this square instead in order to get it away from the pawn, because by moving it to that square, he enabled the fork on the queen and the rook. So the queen gets out of the way, I capture with the knight, and then the queen recaptures. And you might think that the mirror match has come to an end, but it's just getting started. My pawn moves forward, he moves his pawn forward. We've got a nice pawn chain going. I'm moving my rook here to set up a battering ram strategy, which is my word for when you've got 2 rooks on the same file. And he moves his pawn forward, and as you can see, we're forming a bit of a pawn wall here. And that pawn wall is going to get very interesting in the future. So I complete my battering ram. He moves his rook to that file, which I guess is okay. The question is, what is this bishop going to do? Because since it's a light bishop instead of a dark bishop, well, I guess a dark bishop wouldn't be that good here either. A dark bishop would be even more restrictive, but it's the light bishop, so he can't really break through these pawns without losing his bishop. So my pawn moves forward, and the queen moves here. Interesting play. He's getting really deep into my territory right now. So I want to complete the pawn chain that goes all the way across the board. He moves his pawn forward. And, oh, I pressed the wrong button. So I move the king here. I'm just not really sure what I want to do at this point. I think I want to get the battering ram onto the G file. So that is actually a mistake right here, this move. Because it actually enables a move that you would not normally even think about because it's so rare for it to occur. That move is called en passant. You can shoot me for the bad French later, but that is a very rare move to see. It is in fact legal. It occurs when an opponent's pawn moves 2 spaces forward and they're right next to one of your pawns. So you can do this diagonal move in order to make en passant, which is French for in passing, I believe. And in this spot, it would have been very good because it would finally start breaking the pawn wall, even if he retakes here. I can now get the battering ram into motion here and move the rook to take this pawn. And this rook is defended by the other rook, so the queen isn't going to be able to do much. So that would have allowed me to break through and turn the tide of the match. Not that there is a tide to turn, because, you know, I'm in pretty good shape here anyways. I'm up a rook for a bishop, and I decide to offer the queen trade, which I guess he more or less has to accept after I've captured like that. So I get the rooks onto the G file, and the king is going into the corner. This is not really what he wants to do because, you know, I'm hoping to move my pawn onto G5 next and start attacking this file with my rooks. So I decide to advance the pawn, as you see. And his rook, well, his moves are getting a little weird because he's not only short on time. You can see that at this stage of the game, he only has 3 minutes and 30 seconds left, and I have 5 minutes. But also, you know, I can totally understand not knowing what to do here because, it almost looks like it's going to turn into a stalemate, or at least a standoff, where the first to move is in a not-so-good position. But I get my rooks onto the G file, and this is unfortunately the game-losing mistake, because after I make this capture, you have the possible threat of, let me just show it here, you have the possible threat of an instant checkmate by doing this. So what he wants to do is get his rook onto the back, well, he wants to defend this spot right here, so he moves the rook there, but the actual move that you wanted to make would be to move the pawn forward, because then you could get the king onto a better square after I decide to give check. No, not like that. That's awful. Like this. Moving the rook back there was a mistake because I can push my pawn forward, and he resigned after that. He resigned because after he does just about anything, there's really nothing he can do to stop a checkmate at this point. Because capturing the pawn creates the same issue as before. And if he decides to put in a last-ditch blocking effort, like if he decides to move the pawn forward, I can do this, and he has to capture, I think. Well, the king could go here as well, but then you'd be losing the rook. So he has to capture, and then this happens, and then after this, I get a queen. So that's why he resigned. That is the last game for this video, the last very funny game for this video, and it was probably a hoot. So I hope you enjoyed, and if I get some more funny games in the future, I'll be back with those. So, whatever happens next, I'll see you for that. Later, everybody.